Hello, everyone, and welcome to Outlook for Global Economic Recovery. This is our third D'Amore-McKim School of Business COVID-19 Resilience Talk. I'm Emory Trahan, the Senior Associate Dean of Faculty and Research and a Professor of Finance in the D'Amore-McKim School of Business, and I'm very pleased to kick off this morning's talk. First, a little bit about this event and the Resilience Talk series. In an effort to bring our community together during this uncertain time, we're hosting virtual events with faculty experts and alumni thought leaders around specific COVID-19 crisis-related topics. We hope to bring value to you, our community, by providing access to a forum where we can all share ideas and learn about the experiences of others. And we want to provide an opportunity to continue your lifelong learning. These sessions are not simply prepackaged offerings, but rather a platform for unscripted and interactive conversations by D'Amore-McKim for the D'Amore-McKim community. I'd like to now introduce the moderator for today's event, Professor Ravi Ramamurti. Professor Ramamurti is a University Distinguished Professor of International Business and Strategy at Northeastern. He has published 8 books on strategy in emerging markets and a number of award-winning articles on that topic. Ravi is an internationally recognized scholar. One recent study put him in the top 1% of international business scholars worldwide. He's well known internationally for his pioneering research on the strategies of firms in and from emerging markets. In 2008, he was elected a Fellow of the Academy of International Business, the AIB, quote, for outstanding contributions to the scholarly development of the field of international business. Ravi is also an outstanding citizen of the university. He's director of the Center for Emerging Markets, which is a leading research hub at Northeastern on issues facing private and public organizations and emerging economies. Ravi teaches courses on the global business environment and global strategy and electives on competing in emerging markets. And I've known Ravi for many, many years, and I can attest that Ravi is just a genuine and down-to-earth, great colleague. So I'm looking forward to this session, and I'm pleased to welcome your moderator for today, Professor Ravi Ramamurti.
Thank you, Emory, and thank you all for joining us this morning or this evening, depending on where you are. I'm going to ask one more time for those who just joined us, if you could turn off your videos and mute the audios, because I think it'll be easier for everyone to follow the speakers if those are the only faces on the screen. Now, the economies around the world are going through, I think, one of the toughest periods. I remember saying this in 2008 after the financial crisis, that it's one of the worst economic situations since the Great Depression. I find myself saying the same thing again, and this time is actually even truer than the last time during the Great Depression. However, I think it's very clear that we will not be going through Great Depression number 2, because we have a lot more tools and a better understanding of how the global economy functions. But it's still going to be difficult to get out of this economic rut in which we find ourselves. In the US, we're talking about maybe a 10% drop in GDP in the second quarter, maybe even more, and unemployment that is hit 30 million, and again could move even further up. Some of these numbers are comparable to things we've seen during the Great Depression. Now, in order to figure out how we might get out of this situation, both in the US and globally, it would be interesting for the simple reason that Asia is where the crisis began. So Asia is much farther along in dealing with the crisis. And seeing what's happening in Asia can give us some idea of how things might unfold here in the US. Also, Asia has had much more experience with viruses and epidemics of this sort. So I think, once again, I think it's quite instructive for the rest of the world to turn to Asia for lessons on how to manage both the health aspect of this crisis and the economic aspect of the crisis. And in order to explore the Asian perspective, I thought it would be really interesting to talk to people who are in Asia and who are senior executives, CEOs, and so on, who are running actual businesses, who can both tell us what things are like on the ground in their part of the world, and also how their companies and their governments are responding to the crisis. And that might give us some clues on how we might proceed here in the US and other parts of the world. We have a terrific panel, and I'm not going to take a lot of time telling you who they are, but I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves very briefly so you know who they are, so you know how you can pick their brains. And so I'm going to ask first Charles, who is in Shanghai, to briefly introduce himself. Charles?
Hi everybody. My name is Charles Chen. I'm CapitaLand China's CEO of commercial management, including malls, offices, and business parks. Just roughly, we have projects or assets in over 42 cities in China. We have 50 malls. We have 20 CBD office buildings. We have 10 business parks, 150 plus hotel and service apartments. The total portfolio under management of some RMB 270 billion. That's basically our scale and what we are managing day in, day out. Professor Ravi has asked me to talk about some of our experience during this epidemic.
Charles, we're going to hold that off until we introduce the other speakers, then we'll turn to you in just a moment. Okay, that's okay. I'm going to again ask people, if you wouldn't mind, please, who are not speakers, to turn off your videos, because apparently it's affecting the Wi-Fi quality and the connection. I guess if you have too many people showing video, then it makes it harder for the speakers to come through clearly. If you don't mind, if you're not a speaker, would you please turn off your videos in addition to your audio? Thank you so much. Charles, we'll get back to you in just a second. I'd like to ask Dave to introduce himself. Dave is in Bangkok.
Sure.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Nardone. I'm based in Bangkok. I've been living in Asia for 33 years. I'm a Northeastern graduate, both undergrad and graduate, with one son at the school now. I'm with WHA Corporation. We're developers. I'm with the group for 27 years. I'm vice chairman of the board of the parent company and CEO of WHA Industrial Development. We build industrial parks in Thailand. We have 11, about 20,000 acres. We also rent warehouses, logistics parks, factories, about 30,000 square meters of that. We have one project in Vietnam that the first phase is ready, but relatively smaller, about 400 acres. And we're also a water, wastewater, and power business, using that to try to give us some resilience from these types of interruptions, like we saw in Thailand, 1997, 1998. So thank you for joining, and I'm happy to be here tonight.
Thank you, Dave. And now over to Karine in Hong Kong.
Yes, hello everybody. So I might be the only one calling from my office because Hong Kong is still now working the way it should. And yeah, so my name is Karine Hirn. I'm a founding partner of East Capital, and East Capital is an investor in emerging and frontier market equities. So we run mutual funds and mandates, investing basically on the stock markets across the world, but here in Asia, specifically in emerging Asia and frontier Asia. So we invest across all kind of sectors, and it's been a busy time for us. I'm looking forward to providing you more information about how it's been to be an investor in these markets, and I will also be providing you more of the top-down as well as the bottom-up perspective on both on the crisis and the recovery period. Thank you.
Thank you, Karine. Yeah, now let's put up with Charles again. Charles is much farther along than probably any other country in terms of starting to reopen. And someone who owns a lot of property, lots of buildings, malls, including, I think, a mall in Wuhan, give us a feel for what life is like now in Shanghai and other parts of China, and how China is trying to reopen in terms of life and business?
Okay, actually, everything starts in late January. Actually, starting from 23rd of January, then we started to shut down Wuhan. We have 4 malls in Wuhan and office towers, as well as other hotels and other assets. Since then, we shut down the risky trade. The government has asked us to shut down the risky trades. By that, it means even inside the mall, the cinemas, gyms, karaoke, restaurants, and that type of thing we have to close. There are normal operations of this, some of the trades like supermarket and pharmacies. And then they started to require like health facilities, social distancing, start to use cashless payment and density restrictions. So you have to keep a certain distance among others. Since, especially the experience in Wuhan is that since early April, they will start to gradually reopening our malls. And the activities is coming back gradually. Now, overall in China, most of the, actually in our asset, they are 100% reopened. Because this is the May 1st labor holiday now at the moment, our year-on-year traffic is now back to about 70%. Actually, this May holiday, the retail mall traffic has been excellent, and then because the government is also helping to push the sales for people to come back to purchase, a lot of discounts and vouchers are offering to people, to the citizens, so that we are seeing that the trade is coming back, especially in these few days. There's another thing that we have, but even now in China, even in Shanghai and Beijing, these sort of cities, we still have measuring of body temperatures, and in the more sensitive areas like hospital and those places, they will ask you for a personal health QR code, which they have sort of started in this epidemic. They have a system where that each and every one of you will have a health QR code. If it's green, then you can go anywhere because you don't have any issues. If you are under quarantine, you will be having a yellow color QR code. And if you are under a longer period, then you'll be given a red QR code. So they sort of trace you and follow you as to where you go, and all this information comes from the health authority, as well as working together with the telecom companies, the WeChat, as well as the Taobao payment system. Yeah. So that's how they trace the health codes. You want me to go through some of the points I have? Or?
Well, just to follow up on that, this is a national system, right? The QR code. So it's one system applied across the entire country?
I don't know exactly, but it's definitely provincial. Whether it's going through, it's the same system. Definitely everywhere you have this QR code system, but whether it's linked up on a national basis, that I don't know. On different provinces, they all have it.
Okay, and for those who are entering your malls, the only thing you do is check their temperatures before they go in?
Yes, we will check the temperature. Now, because things are more or less go back to normal, basically we just check temperature. As before, we do check temperature, look at the QR code, even record. If it's an office sort of workers or people coming into our office tower, or the business park, we typically trace like which company are you, who are you visiting, and if they are staff of the company, we typically ask them for their traveling history in the past week or so. Yeah. So in case something happened, we'll be able to trace. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of people coming into these shopping centers, are they just walking around just happy to get out of the house, or are they actually shopping?
Yeah, what we find interesting is that after this epidemic, because people has been sort of stay home for a long time, so they really want to come out. But then what we have observed is that even though we only have 60 or 70% sort of footfall or the traffic coming back, we find that people are more targeted shoppers. You know, the window shopper are a lot less nowadays. You know, they will come in to buy certain things. And then the restaurant also, they will come and they will book, or they will know which restaurant they want to go to. Yeah. It's not as many people as before, but the turnover is actually higher than the number of foot traffic.
Okay. And which parts of the industries are struggling the most?
Yeah, those cash flow industry are the worst. Yeah, worst hit. For example, restaurants, those that need a lot of cash flow coming in. Yeah. So our retail mall is a lot hard hit. Then the offices are better, and our business park are also not so bad. The retailer is worse hit. But having said that, in China, it's a little bit like good and bad, because it happens right before the Chinese New Year. And then the Chinese New Year over February, typically there are not that many people anyway. So it's not that much affected. It's only from March that we are actually being affected. So it's like, you know, one and a half months sort of impact that are real serious. And then after, from March onward or late February onwards,
movie theaters
start to come back. Yeah, I was saying that from February, gradually people are coming back. March, we're seeing more and more people come back. And in April, early April, even Wuhan, the most hard-hit city, is now all open. Yeah. So actually, in mid-March, most cities, most of the city were open.
Have you gone out for dinner with your family?
Yes, we did. We do. We do go out, but we wear masks except when we start dinner. And then people, you will see that, you know, people are the restaurant are more loosely paced. You know, the table are not so close, and then the operator tend to have lesser people per table, rather than, you know, before they would try to cram people in.
Okay, well, let's turn to Dave and see what's happening in Bangkok and in Thailand, both in terms of reopening and life and what it feels like, but also how the companies that you deal with are responding. Dave?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, in Bangkok and in Thailand, we're still under a state of emergency. So in fact, the government has a lot of controls. The airport has been closed. Anyone coming in the country since mid-March, including my two kids, coming back from school are under 14-day quarantine. Some of these quarantines have been at Navy bases, but more recently they're making available hotels and other things for this purpose. And we also have a curfew from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And until Sunday, we had a ban on alcohol purchases, and there's no restaurants open, there's really no hotels open. So there's a ban on alcohol. So if you weren't really stocked up, you're in trouble. And this was all to keep the people from mixing and to keep the social distance. One thing I want to note in Thailand, in fact, we have very few cases. We have under 3,000 cases. We've only had 54 deaths. And Thailand has a good health system. We do have experience with SARS and other, you know, regional, I don't know if to call it pandemics, but, and in fact, they've just quarantined, like Phuket, the whole island was quarantined until 2 days ago when they started letting the first 50,000 people off the island would be construction workers, migrant workers. And there's a volunteer health organization, including with the migrants, that has been working, and to Thailand's credit, has a lot of control on that. Now, having said that, everything being closed, of course, is ruining the economy. And Thailand is heavily dependent on tourism, where they had been expecting 38 million tourists. Now the new projection is 13 million. There's no international flights, so it's certainly not in the same condition. There also is, in general, they want you to stay in the province where you are. So stay in Bangkok, stay in Chonburi Rayong, where we have our customers. But our customers can operate. We have over 1,000 factories, over 300 automotive factories, but we're looking at the largest ones. As of the end of last week, we had 84 major companies that are closed for 2 weeks, then 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, including Ford, Mazda, General Motors, Isuzu, pretty much all the big companies, because there's also no demand for that product. There's no export demand for many products, and there's no local market. There's nothing open for people to really have the ability to purchase. So we're hurt, very much on an economic perspective. I'd like, to hear where Charles is, because you're ahead of the curve on where we are in Thailand, and certainly we're going to get there. But then the issue is, what's the level of damage in the economy, and how quick can we recover, given the means that we have in Thailand may be much different than what China has for resources, for both the people and for business, and certainly much different than the resources that you would have in the US to try to address that.
Yeah, Charles, are your factories in China, are they starting to open up too? I know it's not...
Yeah, in terms of our business park, they're all open. I think our last count is close to 90% is back to business now.
Mm-hmm. Are they having the problem that they have referred to, which is a lack of demand for exports? For instance, if they're mainly exporting?
Yeah, we did a survey on our tenants, and what we found is that since this last 2 years, a lot of tenants are not doing solely exports. So a lot of them are export and as well as local sales. So for that, it's sort of not 100% affected, not as bad as David's case that they have a closed shop. Also, this e-commerce things has led to a lot of internal purchasing within China. Like even households during this period buy a lot of stuff that they typically would not buy, because they stay home a lot longer, and the logistic was keep on functioning. They have not stopped the logistics. So home delivery, even F&B delivery is now a big business here.
Okay, over now to Karine in Hong Kong. Karine, give us a sense of what life is like for you in Hong Kong. You gave us some hint already, saying the offices are open, but it's still pretty late for you to be in the office. It's 9:30 p.m. your time. So
yes, it is. But what wouldn't I do for Northeastern University? So no, but I mean, definitely life is more normal here than I guess many places around the world. And at the same time, we do have the feeling that we live in a bubble. We live in a bubble because there are 99% down in terms of number of tourist arrivals or business people. Basically, the borders are sealed. Very strict rules related to quarantine for people coming from overseas. And we have had no local transmission case of the coronavirus now for almost a week, or if not 2 weeks. So this is positive. And in terms of, the life is actually good in a sense that people are more available. No one is traveling, so you can you have a lot of conversation with the companies we invest into, and we just have, as I said, we have some kind of a normal life and going out and just in general. I mean, there's social distancing rules that are put in place, and we go around with this little thing on the face wherever we go, and even sometimes into meeting rooms. So that's the reality of Hong Kong today. Then again, as I was mentioning in my intro, I mean, we invest in across Asia, in all these emerging markets, in all kind of sectors actually. And even though we're more, I mean, we are more bottom-up driven than top-down, I wanted to share with you a couple of thoughts. So first of all, even though it is true that Asia was ahead, and in that sense, it's interesting, very and very relevant to look at the recovery. Asia, of course, is extremely affected by this crisis. So it is probably the deepest crisis ever, and it will take time to recover. So Asia, for the first time in 60 years, will, on average, I mean, in general, will show economic decline this year, minus 0.2%. And basically, it's only China forecast to have any kind of growth, but it's much lower than we've had in the past. So that's the reality. Then again, so these are, of course, these are why such a decline on growth or recession. It's of course all the, there's a demand shock due to this lockdown that have been put in place. And there's also a supply shock with all the value chain that have been distorted, that we just heard from Dave commenting very interestingly. So in that sense, we've already heard these things. But the demand and the supply shock then has, of course, different implications depending on countries. So if I would like to say, China is on its own because it's got a huge domestic economy. As you said, it was the first one to go into this crisis. They responded quickly as well in terms of liquidity injection and making sure that the system will not collapse. But actually, in terms of response, in terms of fiscal response, it's been much less than we've seen in the Western world. So looking at what they decided to basically in terms of stimulus, it's around 4% of the GDP. And in 2009, when people said China saved the world, the fiscal response was around 10% of Chinese GDP. We are, of course, actually expecting more. And one of the reasons we've seen so far quite, I would say, a mute response from China is also because the very important NPC meeting has been delayed and will happen in mid-May if it's according to the rules. So we will probably see much more. What's interesting is what kind of stimulus has been made and put into place. There's much more actually focused on consumption, a bit less on investment than we had before. And but of course, even on the investment side, I think there's clearly a lot of focus on on 5G, industrial internet, data centers, and also something which I think is very positive, a lot into the green project and a greener kind of industrial stimulus. So this is China. Then the rest of Asia, I would say, I mean, it's very difficult to go through that very briefly, but it's very. I mean, there's a lot of divergence, I would say. I mean, some countries have managed to flatten the curve. I mean, Taiwan, South Korea, I mean, because of that, they have experienced less of a shock in terms of domestic consumption. And some other countries are late into this cycle. We're quite worried about Indonesia because, well, the testing capability has been very low, and the population density is very high, and for a number of reasons. And then we've also discussed already on other places in Southeast Asia. So, I'd like to add this, add and conclude on the fact that basically, whenever you look at markets throughout this crisis, there are two different axes of vulnerability. First one is how well these countries are positioned to cope with the virus. And it is clearly questions of, for instance, again, population density, demographic, public health systems, traveling patterns, and all kind of issues that are really about the crisis itself, of being a global health crisis. And then the second axe of vulnerability that you need to take into account is more how resilient their economies are. And here it's also how resilient they are in terms of course, the lockdown, but also how resilient they are because of their exposure to global markets. And here, clearly, some countries are very much affected because they are big exporters, because they also have a lot of, I mean, they are dependent on remittances, on tourists like Thailand, and some others are less vulnerable, and we'll see how this will play out. But clearly, a very interesting time.
I think on one of those points, if I could, I mean, we're really happy to see this low amount of traffic, and with no pollution, we're not used to really this clean air, frankly. So I think coming out of this, we have to look on how to preserve some of those benefits that we're seeing right now.
Yep.
Dave, you also have a range of factories in your industrial parks. You talked about the auto companies. Give us a sense of what some of the other companies are feeling and doing, including any that may be engaged in exports.
Yeah. Okay. So for petrochemical companies, actually that production has been quite steady, but Thailand also happens to have a drought this year. It's the worst that I can remember in 30 years here. So even with trying to have people reduce their consumption, the chemical companies are doing things. The power companies can recycle But the auto companies, where I mentioned we have 84 companies shut down, that sort of helped us on some of the drought mitigation. We have had a large amount of relocation the last 2 years coming from Taiwan and China. Now, there's a small portion of that, of course, is because they want to have more access to the U.S. market because of the retaliatory duties. But the overriding factor has not been that. And equally, the companies, when people are thinking relocation, they're just moving some part of their business at the margin to Thailand, to Vietnam, to diversify the manufacturing base, their cost base, access to other markets. I mean, interesting one is MG. MG is here, and many of us were quite skeptical that they'd be successful, but they're battling with Suzuki and other companies on the low end of the market. They've created export markets. They bought the majority of their shares, where they had partnership with CP Group for a while, and I think have been quite successful. And another one is Great Wall Motors coming in. They bought the General Motors facility both in Thailand and in India, and that's for them to establish a foothold in the ASEAN market, where is sort of the king of the pickup truck market. It's half of the production, and to have access to other markets. So people equally are seeing ASEAN as a growing market. The consumption is rising in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, even further ahead, and looking at those market opportunities. And when people are locating here, I mean, there's some funny stories, because every company we meet, they're massive, because the Chinese economy is 25 times larger than Thailand, 50 times larger than Vietnam. I told you the story of the mattress company that came in, and they said, well, we want to start with 10,000 mattresses a day and then go to 20,000. And they had taken a series of buildings for us that MG was using before they built their own facility, about 50,000 square meters, and then 4 more warehouses, and they were going to another 4. And then I'm thinking, well, gee, the U.S., all the hotels are closed. Their customers are Hyatt, Hilton, IKEA, and then it just all comes to a stop, including maybe some retaliatory duty pressure that would be for Thailand market or for ASEAN market. Other ones making luggage, the same. But we are seeing some type of industry that maybe wasn't our typical one, like electronics. All the name speaker brands you'd use in your home, no matter what brand, many of those are made in Thailand now, and Vietnam even more so. Vietnam will be getting Apple business, many of the large suppliers. And Vietnam matches up well in terms of some of the export-oriented industries that China had and that maybe are not as competitive, like footwear and clothing and labor-intensive electronics. So we expect to see a lot more of that in the northern part of Vietnam, certainly.
I'm going to ask all the attendees, if you have any questions, to please post them on chat, and we will steer them towards the appropriate speakers. I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to just pick one now for you, Dave, and then also invite Charles and Karine. If you have any questions for each other or comments on what you've heard, please jump in. And Dave, that is for you. If you could speak a bit also about what's happening in Vietnam, because you are, your company is now also opening industrial parks in Vietnam. And Vietnam has also been very successful in containing the spread of corona. What do you see happening in Vietnam?
Yeah, I mean, Vietnam, the number of cases are 300 and no deaths, and they have just complete control of the country. Of course, today it's shut down, but we expect that will open. And I think Vietnam is really well positioned in terms of attracting. They are export oriented and a little bit less integrated in terms of the supply line. That's why we're in Nha An province, 280 kilometers south of Hanoi, with initially it's 400 acres, and our first phase will expand to 1,500 acres and could go to 8,000 acres over a period of 20 years or so. And then we're looking for other locations. We did buy into 2 water companies, one in Hanoi and one in the province where we are. I think the prospects here are really bright because Vietnam has been aggressive on many of the free trade agreements. They have the Vietnam-EU free trade agreement. They have a really hardworking, well-educated workforce with good demographics that they can participate. And then this business that is spilling over from China, you look at the northern part of Vietnam where they're getting a lot of electronic business now. It's very good proximity to your customer base and supply base for China, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. So we think the prospects there are really strong. And for us, we want to go as quick as we can in Vietnam for expansion. We just find it a lot more difficult, frankly, than in Thailand. I mean, maybe because we're mostly Thai, but I think the whole one-stop approval process, and that is really more cumbersome, frankly. But I'm there every month when we can fly. I think it's a great place to do business.
Sarah Johnson has a question on what's happening in India. Would someone care to comment? I think, Karine, this might be something that you could take on.
Yeah, that's true. I could do that. Remember that the last time we met, Ravi, in Mumbai,
Yes.
for this fantastic forum? It feels like it was in another life, yeah. But well, yeah. I mean, India is, of course, the infections numbers are growing quite a lot. We're around if I'm not mistaken, around 50,000 today, and there's around 2,000 per day of new cases. And then, of course, like many places around the world, you can question, of course, the capability of testing and the reliability of these numbers. But it is what it is. They just extended the lockdown. The lockdown is actually one of the fiercest in the world. I mean, next to China, or next to Hubei province. And but at the same time as they extended it for further 2 weeks, they've also decided to, which I think is very clever, to be quite pragmatical in their approach. So basically, the 733 districts of India have been categorized with 3 colors: green, orange, and red. And if you're in a red, there's still hardly anything you can do. If you're in the green, well, lucky you, because you can start basically operating more or less normal. The problem being that right now you still have basically the districts which represent 80% of Indian GDP are still in red. So it's quite difficult. So we today, as an investor, we more than ever rely on high frequency data that we get from anything from Google mobility data, or in China the Baidu traffic data, and clearly in India you see the domestic consumption is really affected by the situation, and it's a bit unclear as well how the government is going to respond in terms again of support and fiscal stimulus and all of that. So it's a bit of a question mark, and as I was mentioning in my introduction, we are more worried about Indonesia than India, but India will come maybe second in the places where we think that it's a bit uncertain yet where what's going to happen.
Do you see India picking up any of the investment that might leave China, that looking to diversify out of China?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Just a couple of days ago, or I think it was yesterday, they just announced that across India, they will basically dedicate some land plots for industrial use. Maybe something Dave has to have take a look at. Yeah, its size is the number is funny. It's twice the size of Luxembourg. But then again, Luxembourg is not a huge country, but still. And for industrial parks, and specifically, they want to try to benefit from the trade tensions that we have between the US and China, which right now are have kind of been a bit more, less spoken about, but will emerge again very soon. And there are some geopolitical tensions as well. So I think India is definitely trying to play a role here.
Charles, how do you see the financial institutions responding in China to the plight of companies, especially small companies, that might be struggling to pay their bills?
Yeah, as a result of this epidemic issues, this time there is basically a few groups or angles to help the companies. One is from the government. The government will help the companies direct by giving them assistance, either in tax or direct financial assistance, or to the landlord, and then through the landlord to offer help to the companies. Then is insurance claim wherever is possible from insurance company. Then we are seeing banks. Banks are lending to corporations with more relaxed terms, probably at the request of the government. Then we are also seeing landlords try to help in terms of rearranging of the rental payments, in terms of helping the cash flow. So this is more from the business side. The other observation that we have found, which is which we felt would be quite interesting for the audience, is that as a result of this epidemic, we see that there are some social changes and observations. Number one is that we see a lot of IoT, Internet of Things, are actually happening. We see a lot of internet-related connections between different items, from your phone to your other sort of IT-related equipment. Then we see a lot of online activities is happening. We see a lot of key opinion leaders, key opinion communities are getting very vibrant and very active now. We're seeing AI technology is being deployed now. We're seeing in China, we have drone patrolling in more remote places to make sure that people are actually behaving. Yeah. And then we have large-scale communication survey using AI. So immediately they can go and survey, like, tens of thousands of people at a split second, which is something that they couldn't do before. We're also seeing work from home as a practices. It's getting more widely accepted. In our parks and in our offices, we're seeing, like, close to 10, and in some cases, depending on the stage of their research and development, it could go to as much as 20% of the people will work from home. Of course, at the tail end of it, they will all sit together to talk. Video conferencing become a big thing. We are seeing, like, the Zoom is being used over 300% of what they used to be. Ali's system, Ding Ding, has increased their user rate by over 10 times. Tencent has over 10 million users now. The Tencent conferencing system. We're seeing a lot of requirement on infrastructure. So we are seeing in China, the 5G is definitely inside China. They're pushing very, very hard in order to increase the speed for people to communicate. Then we're seeing, like, separate working team, separate working locations is now something that people are practicing. Logistic requirement is becoming a big thing. Data center that Dave was talking about. Yeah. Logistic, data center, all these are going to be up and coming. Personal hygiene, practicing of distancing. These are all the interesting observations that we find from our assets. That is more like social and probably universal. That we, I think, it's something interesting to share here.
Ravi, can I touch on some of that on the financial aspect, if I
please.
could? I think that's one of the most worrying ones, frankly. I mean, Thailand has a program of about $59 billion US. It's 9% of GDP, so they're doing quite a bit. But many of their programs, of course, they're geared to the employees, to the people that are in the informal sector, the agriculture sector, Social Security payments, paying 50 or 62% of about $450 monthly wage. Which is about half of where the money's going. The other part is in a bond program, but it's really like a short-term lending, only 9 months at prohibitive rates that I think people would be reluctant to go into. And then there's a certain amount of SME lending. So what we saw in 97, 98 was more unique Thai issue, and we had less of a problem in 2008, frankly. But the worrying thing is that now the baht has devalued about 7% this year. And so the money is starting to go out of the emerging markets. The stock market is getting hit much more than what you see in the US market. The stock market here, many of the companies were down 50, 60%, now just starting to recover. And, why Karine is working late probably to take advantage of some of that, anomaly in the market. But also, like, we're in the bond market, and that market is very tough, to be in the market in March or September. And then is the REIT market going to be there for us to put that money when you have, people nervous about where they spend the money? You don't have the foreign funds coming back to that market. I think it's a very big factor for the, not for China, but certainly for the, the ASEAN countries that don't have that same level of resources.
My colleague Ganesh wants to know, what are one or two things that you're learning now that might fundamentally change the way you manage your businesses in the post-COVID world? Any quick thoughts, one or two things that you think might be changed forever in the way you handle your operations or your businesses?
So I'll start. May I start? And from an investor
perspective.
Yes, from an investor perspective, at this capital, we've always thought that the so-called ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors are extremely important, especially in emerging and frontier markets. And the big focus has always been on corporate governance, and it remains on corporate governance because nowadays you have lots of companies which have decided to cut dividends there or postpone their AGMs or do all kind of things that we do not really think are good things. But clearly the big difference now is that there's much more focus on the S part, social. How companies care about their employees, how company cares about their customers, how companies deal with these issues, which are usually associated more with, as I said, less core to the ESG investing. So clearly something that has changed a lot and will remain with us. I also think that clearly, like in our investment business, like or anybody's business, we have learned now to use, I mean, we've always been ourselves because we have different teams in different countries, so we are used to video calls and working digitally. But before we didn't do that with portfolio companies. And now they are actually, I mean, any public listed company has actually really stepped up in terms of communication and accessibility for investors. They understand that all investors are worried as well. And I think this is something that will also stay with us. So it's going to be easier to get people on a Zoom or in the future. And there will be less traveling, business traveling, because it will become just less essential.
So is that bad news for the real estate sector, Charles?
Yes. This is an interesting question. So one of the questions we have been asking ourselves is that would there be a lot less office requirements, moving forward? And we are actually, even in this short time frame of few months, we are seeing the renewal of offices. They will sort of reduce in their size. So for us as a big landlord, we have to have different products to cater for different needs. More flexible space, more sort of intermediate space. We're seeing a few fronts for me is that we're seeing online and offline shopping integration is definitely must to come. So this is something that definitely will come. As to how, in what form and shapes, that's something we have to work out. Definitely a lot more in IoT. You like it or not, this technology in terms of communication and all that cannot be stopped. Internet of Things, they're going to link everything up. Actually, interesting enough, just this few days, I was helping my wife to do some shopping of a robot vacuum cleaner plus vacuumer plus cleaner. And this robot vacuumer you can actually use your mobile phone to turn it on, and they have a camera on it, so you can see what they are vacuuming. And this is what you call about Internet of Things. Clean your office, clean your home remotely. And the other things that we are now facing is that shopping capacity limitation. By that I mean that for people going to a supermarket or going to a mall, if there's too many people, you better watch out. You want them to keep the social distancing. And the other thing is really working from home. And what Karine was saying, that this remote meeting things and less business traveling will also affect our hotel businesses. I mean, how is that going to happen to pan out? But for us, in terms of the retail business, the next big question is that how to have safe and yet enjoyable socialization. Is it still the coffee shop and bar? If not, then what? That would be a multi-million-dollar question that everybody's trying to find a solution.
Yeah, just as a quick follow-up, Professor Yip would like to know, how do you see this affecting the culture of doing business, say in China, where face-to-face has always been a very important part of making deals and transacting business? Do you see that changing?
I'm seeing, in fact, for our business, we're seeing the online is getting a lot more
accepted.
widely accepted, and it has to be very effective. And then they tend to be, now the practices, they tend to do it first, and if there are error, they will cater for it, and then you fix it later on, you know. So that before, we tend to have a 40 pages agreement or contract for people to sign up, right? Now it's more like, you know, give them a shorter contract. And if you, but then with a lot of allowances, if there's something wrong, you go back and you negotiate and talk. So that is going to happen, I think. And then all this online thing, it's definitely going to be very different. As before, we want to see a face before we say yes. Probably now you're not allowed to. You have to make a decision online. You know, if the guys tell you all this, are you going to trust him? But then with technology, you probably can do your fact checking or relationship checking a lot easier than before.
But you can track this person. You can know exactly where this person has been as well. So.
Yes. I think it's more towards that angle than technology is really, you know, taking over this time. Our feeling, as compared to the last SARS epidemic.
Deb?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always thought we were way ahead in terms of, you know, the smart and eco and environmental, what we were doing on our industrial estates and operations. But the front office, back office, we're trying to make that digital transformation. So I think we've just, you know, we're hiring consultants right now. We're moving to a new building early next year, but I think we've been able to leapfrog that whole transformation of necessity. We're doing 3 to 5 team meetings a day, and our people aren't quite as busy, so you can put more resources on it. So once you go there, you never come back, and it's going to change a little bit on how we work, and we'll feel more confident. We don't have to be in the office. We don't have to be in Vietnam necessarily. We can exchange documents, including with customers and other people. I mean, we've showed some Chinese customers our industrial land using drones. And so even one time, most of the time they want to visit, but so some unusual things that you won't turn back. I mean, the other positive thing we've seen, we've had to look a lot more deeply at how our people are doing in terms of they have kids at school, we're at school that are now at home, and we want them to stay home, or how do they get to work? If they're taking a bus, then we're paying someone else to carpool and pick them up. So I think it's given us some really nice camaraderie and care in terms of how we take care of our people, and interjecting health and families probably a lot more in the process than what's normal, which is a great thing.
That's the S I was talking about. Huh?
Yeah.
I want to add on David's point. I think David got very good points there. What we also find is that the tenants or our business partner are now a lot more receptive to all these ideas. Whereas before they probably don't accept it. Now they are willing to try. They're willing to play along. And then our staff also is more willing to try new things. This COVID is really forcing everybody, try to be a lot more careful in terms of health, in terms of safety, and in terms of social distancing. So this is happening. That's why to us the biggest question is yet how can people socialize happily without worrying about it's too close. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the big questions we're going to have to wrestle with, I think, in the coming months. Our time has gone by really fast, and I see there are several more questions that from the audience that we have not had a chance to address. I'm going to see if there is some way to forward these to some of our speakers and have them maybe respond to you privately. But there are lots of, I think we've raised more questions than we've answered. This is typical of these kinds of discussions, because it's such a wide range of issues that we are confronting. The good news I think I would take away from this conversation is this is not Great Depression #2. It will not be, because I think we've learned a few lessons from the last Great Depression, and we are doing a lot of things right to avoid it becoming a second Great Depression. But it doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. And it doesn't mean that, like the stock market in the US at least, has had a very sharp rebound, a V-shaped recovery in a very short period of time. The real economy, Main Street, is not going to recover that fast. Particularly is, 70% of the traffic is back, which is remarkable a few weeks ago. 100% is what it would take for us to get back to where we used to be. So the good news is that we are probably going to see an uptick. Getting back to 100% of where we used to be is going to be a tough slog, and probably will not happen in a straight line. There will be some zigs and some zags. There could be a second wave in each of the countries that could sort of create a setback. But the key, I think, is whether demand will come back. What we've seen is that you can take away the demand overnight or in a matter of days. It can just disappear, as it did. It just fell off the table. But getting that demand to come back is a much slower process. And I think, Karine, as you were suggesting, until we get demand back, supply is not going to come back. Supply is probably best positioned to come back because it's all in place. There's a lot of capacity. There's employees waiting to be hired or rehired. But until demand comes back, the supply will not be able to catch up. And if supply doesn't come back, that means you don't have the jobs. And without the jobs, the demand can't come back. So we get a bit of this chicken and egg type of situation. Number of reasons why we think demand will be slow to come back. We've already touched on it. We have lots of people who have lost their jobs. We have people who are making less money than they used to make. People are afraid to consume certain products and services where they have to have come in closer social contact with other people. We've seen that industries like tourism will have a very hard time bouncing back. Travel, hospitality, and all of those industries, restaurants, all of which require face-to-face, will be held back partly out of fear that people will have of consuming those services. There's also the problem of export demand. You know, even if your country is up and running and you're ready to produce the product, if the rest of the world is not able to buy your products because they are in a different phase of the cycle, that is another kind of demand that will be hard to get it back up and running. There's also, I think, some reluctance on the part of people to spend, because when you have a crisis like this, people cut back on spending, they save more, or be coming back, and until demand comes back, I think we can forget about a big jump in investment. We haven't talked much about who's investing in new capacity, but if your existing plants are idle, then it doesn't make sense to add more capacity. So the last thing to recover will probably be the investment, whether it's real estate or factories and things of that sort. And the good news, I think, in the US is a very, very aggressive stimulus. I think the IMF says we've had about $9 trillion worth of stimulus globally so far, and there's more to come. But not all countries are able to provide this kind of stimulus. And I think the emerging markets in particular, Karine, you mentioned Indonesia and India, large countries with large population without the capacity to provide large stimulus are going to have an even harder time. And I think we're going to have to see how the IMF and the other institutions step up. I feel we've raised and touched on a lot of long-term issues. We really didn't talk about them very much because we're so focused now on getting through this crisis. One thing we've touched on is the role of digital going forward, how the digital revolution is going to change things, some perhaps permanently, others in a more temporary way. We don't quite know how the supply chains are going to get reorganized and reconfigured. Some of the companies will want to leave China, some will want to move to other countries, some will want to reshore or nearshore critical inputs and supplies. So how that is going to shape up in the medium term and long term, we don't quite know. The forces of deglobalization, countries becoming more nationally focused, that's another trend long term that is something we need to think about. Inequality, which has been a problem within countries and across countries, is probably going to also get worse. And that is going to be another festering problem that we're going to have to deal with. And finally, the role of international institutions like the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, even the role of the G20, is not as strong as it might have been and has been in the past. So these are all issues in the long term that I think are going to have to be also be addressed. Maybe we need to do another webinar at some point to talk about long-term issues. But I have found the session absolutely fascinating. I've learned a lot. I want to thank Charles and Dave and Karine, especially it's late in the evening for you guys. Appreciate very much your doing this for us. I should mention all three are also parents of students at Northeastern. Maybe that explains why they're up late in the evening doing this for us. Thank you all. Thank you also to the organizers at the D'Amore-McKim School of Business and at the Center for Emerging Markets for putting this together. And thank you, audience, for joining us and sharing with us some of your thoughts and questions. If we do another one, we of course will look forward to. Good night, be safe, goodbye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Cheers. Wake up.
Bye.
Bye-bye.